Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
I actually said evening. That's awesome. Thought I was going to say morning. My name is Michael, and I'm currently a Chaplin fellow at the VA. I spent about a month and a half there. The previous year I spent with Lewis over at Johnson City Medical Center. A little bit about my past. I joined the military when I was 18, around 1998, and I spent about a total of 12 years in service. I was a hospital corpsman in the Navy, but I spent about 75% of those 12 years in the Marine Corps infantry as a corpsman. I did serve in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, when we first got there, one of the chaplains, one of the main base chaplains, he was addressing my company, and he told us, he was like, take away the Taliban, the people that were trying to kill us, take them out of the equation. And Afghanistan itself, just the country, just the land itself, is still a very dangerous place. And he said, you're going to spend some time here, and you're going to have some feelings while you're here that you've never felt before. And if you take those feelings and you take the time to look around, you might just find God. And I'm here to tell you that I spent some time in Afghanistan, and I felt some of those feelings, and I truly met God there in that country. And I tell you this part of my story because, I just kind of want to share a small snippet of my testimony, but also because this meaning making from, some of the terrible things that happened to me over in Afghanistan really connects, it deeply connects with the veteran community, the demographic that I deal with day to day. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that community and who they are, what they bring home with them, and how chaplains can minister to that. Out of 329 million people that live in the U.S. today, there's only 1% on active duty right now that serve in the armed services. Only 1% of our population do we ask to go into harm's way and defend our country. Only 1% of our population do we ask to go in our stead over there to a different country, defend our country, go in our stead so that we can sit here and raise our family. Only 1% of our population do we say, suffer the hardships of being away from your family, be constantly fearful for your life, go forth and take life if necessary, and suffer the guilt and shame that comes with that. Needless to say, there's a plethora of injuries that our service members suffer overseas, anywhere in the military, exposed to just all these kinds of stressors from war, both physical and emotional. And I want to talk about one of the most basic ones, and it doesn't even have to have anything to do with war. The military is a culture within American culture itself. When I was active duty, me and my family, we were surrounded by all kinds of people that were like us, that were going through the same thing as us. When I was deployed overseas, I was surrounded by other service members, of course. My family was back home, but they were still surrounded by other spouses, other children that were missing their service members as well. We were literally a tribe of warrior families that supported one another in our hardships during those times. So to transition from that tribe-like life to a new place or even coming back home is very difficult for a service member to do. We go from a unit of people who support and care for our needs, the needs that they know that we have, to going to an apartment complex or a cul-de-sac of people that we don't know and, a lot of times don't even care about the things that we've been through. And even if we do find people that care, it's hard for them to really relate to the things that we've gone through. And so you see the rise of different veteran organizations, biker clubs, the VFW in the VA, where veterans can go there and they can say, I'm understood here. These people know what I'm going through. So what are some of these issues that veterans we bring home from combat, from all kinds of stuff, and one of the most prominent is post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD as most people call it. And this is a psychiatric disorder wherein somebody has either been a victim of or witnessed a traumatic event such as death, disaster, or sexual violence. And the result of this is the person that's been exposed to this traumatizing event just relives it constantly over and over through nightmares and through flashbacks and stuff like that. And there's a lot more to be said about post-traumatic stress disorder. I can't get into all of it, but what I can speak to is that we don't always exhibit when we first come home. We don't have the symptoms when we first come home because we're over there in country, in combat, and we have our armor on. We built this barrier between ourselves and all these emotions that we're trying to protect ourselves from, like fear and grief and all this stuff. We don't have time for all that. We got time to clean our weapon. We got time to shoot on the move. We got time to survive. We got time to try to come home alive. But when we do come home, we don't need that armor. We don't need that barrier, so we kind of let it go, you know? And then what comes out, just this huge flood of all these emotions that, you know, should have been felt and should have been processed over in combat, but it wasn't because we didn't have time for that. We don't know how to deal with that. We don't know how to deal with this flood of emotions that comes out and just, I mean, it's just like waves coming at you. It rises up, it goes down and everything. But research has said that it's not necessarily the severity of the PTSD that drives us to go to the VA to be seen. I'm sure that some people do, they just get so bad they gotta go, they gotta find out what's going on. But research says that the number one reason is because they have questions about spirituality. They have questions about the guilt that they feel. They have questions about the meanings of these events. And sometimes it does get so bad that we lose the meaning of life. We lose our purpose in life. And this connects with me, with my story, because as I shared with you, you know, I went through some bad things and I had some feelings, but I was able to make meaning through that while I was in country. I met God there, and I knew God was there to protect me, and maybe even not necessarily bring me home, but God had me in His arms, and I was able to make that connection. Not everybody can, you know. Another thing that people suffer from is moral injury, and moral injury can occur when we have broken the moral code, or we've witnessed the breaking of a moral code, which is set down by our families, the way that we've grown up, set down by the service. You know, we have what they call rules of engagement, excuse me, set down by our nation, by our society itself. We've broken this code, and it's just like, we know it's serious. It's like, who are we? In combat, you have to move fast and you have to make split decisions. When that happens, sometimes there's collateral damage, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And I've heard it described, moral injury, as being a chapter in a book of our life. You know, you have the event, and then you have your life before, you have your life right now, up to now. But when you have moral injury, that's the only chapter you ever spend time in. It's the only chapter you ever read. And so you slowly begin to forget who you were. You don't know who you are, and that moral injury becomes who you are. And this, like I said before, this can also happen simply by just witnessing something that has happened, and you just feel powerless, or you can't prevent it or something like that. And it's a terrible thing. I've heard veterans talk about it. I mean, it literally, sometimes I've seen them like really just like they're twisting inside when they're talking about it. Another thing is survivor's guilt. This is guilt based on having survived a traumatic event when others did not. And I can't even tell you how many times I've talked to veterans who who feel guilty over losing a buddy in combat. Maybe it's a pitched battle. Maybe, they switched convoys because one was tired or something like that. Or maybe they just simply switched a seat in a Humvee, and then that person dies in an explosion or something. They say, that should have been me. And they feel guilty about that. And this survivor guilt can also stem from sexual attacks, and sometimes the survivor feeling like they're responsible for that attack, which is never true. It's never true. Which brings us into military sexual trauma, which is rape or repeated sexual harassment that occurred in the military. And, when you first hear that, we've given it a military term and everything. Well, what is the difference between that and just some type of attack here? Well, there is a difference because the military has not always been the greatest about addressing these problems, and it still struggles with it today. In the past, even while under investigation, you may still be working right next to your attacker. I can't even imagine what that would feel like, just constantly fearful of your life. You may have been attacked by somebody in your chain of command and are completely powerless to make a report or change your situation. I can't imagine that either. The military still strives to deal with these issues, but the VA is where these men and women will hopefully come and seek treatment and understanding. There are many other ways a veteran is unique when it comes to hospitalization and being a specialist at the VA. I can't cover all of them, but I do want to kind of share a little bit about ministry to veterans. And I guess I just kind of want to share that chaplaincy is unique in the fact that, when we walk into this room, we don't have an agenda. Every other healthcare professional has an agenda. A nurse goes in there to monitor vital signs, change a bandage, or start an IV. A CNA goes in there to bathe the patient or make them more comfortable, with their position or something like that. A doctor goes in there to have a pointed conversation with the patient and talk about decisions, but they all have a job to do. They can have emotional and meaningful conversations with these people, but still they have that job to do. As chaplains, that is our job. We walk into that room, and it's our job to be with that person. And sitting there and speaking with the patient, we're hearing their story. Storytelling is one of the most important things to us as human beings. In our stories, out of them, we make meaning out of our lives. When terrible events occur in our lives, like war and disaster, it can be difficult to make meaning out of that. In my story, God brought me closer to Him through 2 explosions that could have killed me. But for those who don't believe for those who do believe in the divine, we can begin to ask questions about how the divine enters their story. Do you believe in God? Is God a God of wrath to you? Is God punishing them? Does God suffer with them? What does Scripture have to say about God? We can ask them these questions, and they can reflect on that. Who is God to me, and how does God enter my story? For those who don't believe in a divine power, we can discuss what brings them peace, what brings them hope and meaning to their life, and how does that play into their story. In addition to this, we do share Scripture. We provide rituals such as communion, baptism, and offer prayer in order to connect or reconnect the patient with God. Tap into their own spiritual resources, and they tell us what they need. For believers of other faith, we connect them with the appropriate clergy to minister to them. Specifically where I work in the mental health area, we come across many people that struggle severely with all the things that I discussed before: PTSD, moral injury, survivor's guilt. We conduct groups on whole health, on grief and loss, anger management, guilt and shame, forgiveness. This is all residual stuff that happens with all these different things, and it kind of allows them the ability to cope. We give them tools in order to cope with these different things that are happening in their lives. There's a lot to speak about concerning chaplaincy in the VA, and I'm unable to cover everything here. For the most part, I just wanted to let you know who the veteran is, because they're walking out there among us, and they're just carrying these shackles on them, you know. I just want you to know who they are. Everybody struggles with all of these things on some level, but the veteran being in combat was exposed to it on a constant basis, and it really does affect them. If you'd like to know more, I have more information available afterwards. Thank you.